On a cold January night in 2003, in the quiet suburb of Camp Hill, Pennsylvania, a young woman's life ended long before it ever should have. Her name was Randy Trimble. Bright, compassionate, full of dreams she never got the chance to live. What happened inside her home that Friday night wasn't random, and it wasn't senseless chaos. It was something far heavier, a betrayal so deep it changed everyone who knew her. Tonight, we revisit her story with gentleness, care, and truth. At just 28 years old, Randy was already building a life rooted in service. She worked at a rehabilitation center, a place where patients leaned on her kindness, her steady presence, her ability to make people feel safe. Friends remembered her as the kind of person who showed up, with laughter, with warmth, with solutions, with empathy. She was the friend you called when life felt too heavy. She was the daughter her parents were endlessly proud of. Her routines were simple. Morning coffee, long shifts helping others heal, and quiet evenings with her husband, Brian Trimble. A man she trusted, a man she believed was building a future with her. No one imagined the fear hidden beneath that foundation. To those around them, Brian and Randy appeared stable. They lived in a modest home in East Pennsboro Township, spoke about future plans, and hosted friends without issue. But beneath the surface, subtle cracks were beginning to form. Emotional distance, financial tension, quiet frustrations that whispered rather than shouted. Randy tried to fix things. She believed in communication, in patience, in working through challenges. Brian, however, carried his own shadows, insecurities, fantasies of escape, and a growing discontent that he concealed from everyone, including Randy. And in the background stood someone else. Blaine Norris, Brian's close friend. A man whose relationship with Brian would become the fulcrum of the tragedy ahead. On January 4, 2003, the day before her mother left for a cruise, Randy was last seen alive by her family. She looked happy, calm, unaware that someone she loved was harboring thoughts she couldn't have imagined. She didn't know that Brian had been having long conversations with Blaine. Secret calls, covert planning, whispered discussions about money, about future freedoms, about things that should have sent alarms blaring. She didn't know that Blaine was spiraling financially from failed film projects, or that Brian had begun seeing her not as a partner, but as an obstacle. Randy entered the final week of her life with trust. The people around her entered it believing everything was normal. Only Brian knew the storm he was nurturing. On Friday, January 10th, Brian told Randy he had dinner plans with friends. She stayed home, a quiet night, nothing unusual. Hours later, Brian returned and walked into the garage. That's when the call to 911 came, his voice shaking, his story beginning. A tragedy reported, a marriage shattered, a community unaware that the truth was far more complicated than the scene suggested. When police arrived at the Trimble residence, they stepped into a scene that felt instantly wrong. Randy was found lying on the garage floor, still, silent, her life already gone. There were no signs of forced entry, no shattered glass, no overturned furniture suggesting a desperate struggle. Just a stillness that didn't match the violence implied. Brian told officers he had just returned home from dinner and found her like this. He appeared emotional, shaken, distressed, pacing, but something about the moment felt off. Not dramatic, not obvious, just slightly out of rhythm with what detectives were trained to see. They weren't thinking of guilt yet. They were thinking of clarity, and clarity was missing. In the first hour of questioning, subtle discrepancies began to surface. Brian couldn't recall certain times. His voice shifted when talking about where he had been, and detectives noticed something else. His grief seemed oddly compartmentalized, present when convenient, absent when the questions deepened. Again, nothing concrete, nothing damning, just the faintest hum of dissonance. Then came the crime scene inconsistencies. The position of Randy's body didn't align with Brian's explanation. The pattern of injury suggested more than a sudden encounter, and there was no immediate evidence of a break-in or robbery. It was as though the scene had been arranged to look chaotic, but not lived in chaotic. Constructed chaotic, a difference investigators are trained to recognize. When detectives subpoenaed the phone logs, the investigation took its first decisive turn. Logs revealed multiple calls between Brian and someone else during the time frame surrounding Randy's death. Not brief check-ins, sustained conversations. And the person on the other end was Blaine Norris. First, this made no immediate sense. Blaine was Brian's friend. Friendly calls weren't suspicious, but the timing was too close to the moment Randy died. Too repetitive, too synchronized. Investigators circled the name. Blaine had financial troubles. Blaine was struggling emotionally. And Blaine had a complicated, oddly dependent relationship with Brian, one Brian never mentioned in his initial statement. The case stopped feeling like a single offender scenario. It began feeling like a blueprint. While detectives processed evidence, Brian began behaving strangely. He appeared at the station repeatedly, sometimes calm, sometimes frantic, often with information that didn't match earlier statements. He volunteered small details that hadn't been asked. He corrected officers on parts of the timeline that he previously claimed he didn't remember. Detectives noted a familiar pattern. People who grieve seek answers. People who fear exposure seek control. Meanwhile, Blaine Norris, the friend connected by those phone logs, stayed noticeably silent. He didn't reach out. He didn't appear at the station. He didn't check on Brian. Distance itself became suspicious. By the end of the first week, the investigation's tone had changed completely. What began as a suspected break-in gone wrong now pointed toward something far more devastating. Intentional harm, planned violence, and betrayal from within Randy's own home. The evidence wasn't just whispering. It was starting to speak clearly. The timeline tightened. Motives began to surface. And two names remained at the center: Brian Trimble, Blaine Norris. Investigators didn't yet know the full truth, but they knew this. One of these men held the answers, and the other might be the key. As detectives deepened their investigation, the name Blaine Norris resurfaced again and again. He wasn't just a friend. He was woven into Brian's life in a way that felt uncomfortably dependent. Blaine had been struggling financially. His independent film project had collapsed, leaving him drowning in debt. Brian had been helping him emotionally, sometimes financially, and according to friends, the two shared an unusually intense bond. This wasn't merely friendship. It was reliance. And sometimes reliance becomes leverage. Investigators began to suspect that Blaine's desperation met Brian's dissatisfaction, creating a dangerous, mutual vulnerability. What they didn't know yet was just how far that bond had gone. When detectives dug deeper into Brian's life, the motives began to crystallize. Financial strain, marital tension, life insurance policies, a growing emotional detachment, pressure from Blaine's financial implosion. It became clear that Brian felt overwhelmed by the responsibilities of marriage, and saw Randy not as a partner, but as a barrier to the life he wished he had. Several weeks before Randy's death, Brian spoke to coworkers about feeling trapped. Small comments, offhand remarks, nothing alarming at the time, but ominous in hindsight. And then there were those phone logs. Each call between Brian and Blaine mapped a pattern. Planning, reassurance, coordination. This was no spontaneous act. It was something closer to orchestration. When investigators finally brought Blaine in for questioning, cracks appeared instantly. He was anxious, stiff, struggling to maintain eye contact. His timeline didn't align with Brian's, and neither matched the physical evidence. He insisted he wasn't involved. He insisted he didn't know anything, but his tone betrayed him, trembling, evasive, a man trying to bury something he wasn't built to carry. Detectives recognized the signs. People who lie to protect someone often crumble first, especially when the story they're protecting wasn't their own idea. They continued pressing. Meanwhile, forensic results were arriving. The autopsy, the crime scene interpretation, the inconsistencies in Brian's recounting. Everything pointed toward a two-man blueprint. Brian orchestrated, Blaine executed. Under sustained pressure, Blaine Norris eventually broke. He admitted pieces of the truth, small at first, then larger, forming a chain that investigators pulled carefully and gently. According to Blaine, Brian wanted out of his marriage. Brian confided that Randy's death would free him. Brian orchestrated the timing and logistics. Blaine, desperate for approval and drowning in debt, agreed to help. It wasn't just betrayal. It was exploitation wrapped in friendship, a manipulation that destroyed two families and ended one young woman's life. Detectives documented everything with restraint, knowing this confession would redefine the case entirely. The story Brian had crafted, the shocked husband coming home to tragedy, was officially over. Here's what the investigation ultimately established. Brian arranged to be away from the house on January 10th, giving Blaine access. Phone calls between them timed the entry, the attack, and the cover-up. Blaine carried out the murder inside the Trimble garage. He left the scene staged to resemble an attack from an unknown intruder. Brian returned home hours later and called 911, acting as a grieving husband. Both men maintained their roles until the pressure of evidence fractured the lie. Each element fit together with disturbing precision. Detectives didn't sensationalize the act. They focused on truth, accountability, and honoring Randy's humanity by clarifying what happened, not dramatizing how. This wasn't just a crime scene. It was the manifestation of betrayal layered over months. With the confession recorded and both men implicated, investigators shifted toward prosecution. The story now held every tragic component: a trusting wife, a husband hiding resentments, a friend looking for validation, a conspiracy born from weakness and selfishness. And yet, through it all, the focus remained on Randy, her life, her kindness, and the devastating injustice she endured. The next step was court, and a community waiting for accountability. With Blaine's confession and the phone evidence in hand, investigators moved quickly. Brian Trimble, once seen as the grieving husband, was arrested and charged. Neighbors were stunned. This was a man who appeared gentle, soft-spoken, faithful. Yet behind that facade lived calculation and resentment. Blaine Norris was arrested as well. His confession had placed him at the scene, but it also exposed Brian as the architect. Both men were now facing murder charges, one for orchestrating, one for carrying out the violence. What began as a baffling tragedy now revealed itself as a carefully executed betrayal. And the community grieved a second time, this time for the truth. When the case entered court, prosecutors emphasized the emotional heart of the crime. Randy was trusting. Randy was unaware of the danger in her own home. Randy believed her marriage was stable. Randy had no chance to defend herself. The prosecution made it clear that her death was not the result of impulse or argument. It was planned, orchestrated through secret calls, timing, and a willingness to sacrifice her life for financial and emotional convenience. Brian Trimble, faced with overwhelming evidence and Blaine's testimony, eventually entered a guilty plea to avoid the uncertainty of trial. He admitted what investigators had already proven. He arranged for his friend to murder his wife. Blaine Norris, the man who executed the plan, also pled guilty, acknowledging his role and the desperation that made him susceptible to Brian's manipulation. The courtroom was quiet as the details were read. No dramatics, just the devastating truth. In the end, Brian Trimble received life in prison. His plea acknowledged that he orchestrated the killing of his own wife, something the judge described as a profound breach of trust, humanity, and moral obligation. Blaine Norris also received life in prison without parole, the penalty fitting the severity of his actions. There were no winners, no relief that erased the damage. But there was accountability, a recognition that Randy's life mattered, that her death would not be dismissed or minimized. The judge noted the cruelty of the crime, not in its physical description, but in its emotional truth. Randy died believing she was safe. She died never knowing her husband had plotted her final moments. That alone is a tragedy beyond measurement. In the months that followed, Randy's family faced the impossible task of grieving while learning the full truth. Her mother, who had left for a cruise the day before Randy was last seen alive, carried a pain no parent should bear. Her father spoke of her compassion, her bright future in rehabilitation care, her capacity to love honestly and fully. Friends gathered to share stories, gentle ones, funny ones, memories that kept her close. Randy's death transformed an entire community. It deepened conversations about intimate partner violence, coercion, and the dangers hidden beneath seemingly stable relationships. People who knew her say they still feel the echo of her kindness, a reminder that love and vulnerability deserve protection, not exploitation. Today, Randy is remembered not for her final moments, but for the life she lived. Her work helping patients heal, her laughter that softened people, her commitment to family, her quiet resilience, her belief in others. Her story has shaped awareness efforts around domestic violence and murder-for-hire cases, serving as a painful but necessary reminder. Danger is not always loud. Sometimes it hides in familiarity, routine, and the people we're taught to trust. Randy's life continues to inspire, and her memory encourages conversations that protect others from similar fates. If you found this case fascinating, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. We post crime case videos every night. Until next time, stay sharp, stay vigilant.